Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all having a great time and getting a little smarter with each session. My name is Angela Tice. I'm the Northeast Region Director and the National Membership Chair of the CFO Leadership Council, and I'm so glad that so many of you joined us today. I'm so proud of this organization, and a big shout out to Jack McCullough for starting it all. We are certainly living in a time where having reliable resources is so important to our overall success. I'm so pleased to be a part of the CFOLC where we make it a priority to cultivate communities where true connection and collaboration is realized. Whether it is one of your peers you need to bounce an idea off of or an expert who can guide you, being involved with our fellow members at the CFO Leadership Council really gives you all of that. Empowering you is not only our tagline, but it is truly our vision and our everyday goal. If you're a guest at the conference today and you've not signed up for membership, I highly encourage you to join. This conference is only one of the fantastic benefits that are available to you. I invite you to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss how you can get more involved. And really just a shout out to all of our current members that are here today. I just want to thank each of you for making this organization a wonderful, close-knit, and reliable resource for all of us. We so appreciate all that you contribute. And now I'll hand it off to Nina Trentman. She's the news editor with the Wall Street Journal CFO Journal, covering corporate finance and in New York. And she reports on US companies and their finances, including bond issuance, CFO appointments, corporate debt, mergers and acquisitions, tax and trade issues. And boy, Nina, you do so much more. But I'll leave it at that and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Angela, for the introduction and for making it sound as if I'm doing an awful lot more things that I'm currently doing, which has been writing a lot about the pandemic and how it impacts companies and CFOs, as well as then also talking to companies about the election and what it means, the outcome, what it means for their businesses, which is not necessarily the topic for today. So today we're going to talk about innovation and the role of CFOs in that, given that, of course, all of you are possibly working at companies facing a lot of competition in their industries. How can companies remain innovative? And also, what is the role that CFOs are playing in this as the people who are allocating funds to this, but also the people who are tracking progress of these projects. I'm joined by 4 fantastic panelists. There's Tim Kelly from the CFO of Foundation Medicine, which is a pharmaceutical company owned by Roche that focuses on cancer research. We have Roxy Wen from the CFO of Mozilla, that you probably know as the company behind the Firefox internet browser. We have Ozan Kaya, who is the CFO of ShopRunner, a company that offers a membership program for consumers that I'm sure we're going to hear more about in a few minutes. And then we have Toyin, who is joining us from Africa today, the founder of the Africa Finance and Strategy Hub, which is advising finance executives in her area. She previously worked as CFO at Celluland, a cellular company, and also then Airtel Nigeria. So, well, thank you all for joining. It's very good to see you all and to see that the technology is working out well. Yeah, I just would be curious to hear from all of you as we're talking about your role as CFO and the innovation strategies that all of your companies have. If you could just give our audience a little bit of an introduction as to what's your role in your company as it relates to innovation and change, and then we can take it from there. Tim, why don't you start us off?
Sure, and thanks, Nina. Happy afternoon to everybody. Part of my role, it includes, of course, the traditional pieces of finance and managing our budget, but a big piece of that is about our portfolio, and we're constantly looking at how we can maximize our portfolio investments in R&D. What are the trade-offs we need to make? What are the NPVs that maximize our investments and our timeline to investment along with risk? The other part of the role that I have is corporate development and our external innovation. And so looking at what are those opportunities where we can bring in other capabilities that we can't develop in-house and really recognizing what's the science behind where our capabilities are, where is the industry going, and what might be interesting externally that we might want to bring in through partnership, acquisition, or other ways of working. So a breadth of ways there where every day is filled with innovation.
Roxy, how about you?
Thank you. So I run finance and business operations at Mozilla. So from an innovation perspective, as Tim said, right, we have the role to manage a portfolio from an investment point of view and our budget and the long-term capital or M&A business development kind of investment. But from a business operations side, also there's a enablement of innovation from infrastructure, cloud operations, and data science, data analytics to enable software product to get feedback and get user intelligence to guide the product development, guide innovation effort, and also from a just external partnership. Mozilla is an open source company, and open innovation is actually a very unique approach we have here. And our BD group and our open innovation group that I have a close relationship and actually reporting relationship with, that's also part of my responsibility. Yeah.
Remind us what BD stands for those of us who don't know the business well.
Business development. Yeah.
Ozan.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Similar to Tim and Roxy, I oversee a wide breadth outside of even just finance. So I oversee our corporate development function. We also have an innovation function that's separate than our core offering. I also oversee data analytics. So when I joined 4 years ago with our CEO, our primary benefit is a membership program, as Nina was alluding to, which is 2-day free shipping, free returns. And as you can imagine, with the tens of thousands of employees working at Amazon that are innovating every hour, all the brands are being left behind. And so I'm fortunate enough to, both on the M&A side, which we'll get to probably in a little bit, and both in-house have been developing products that are empowering all the brands to get the benefit of all of them working together, that they can each take advantage of as they compete against Amazon. So I'm very fortunate to have a multi-dimensional role that goes across the organization to learn about the business.
Toyin, how is that for you, given that sort of you have this new role now as founder of the Africa Finance and Strategy Hub? Sort of what are the things that you're working on, and also what are the learnings that you can bring from your previous roles as controller and CFO? I think you need to unmute.
Thank you so much for having me. In my previous role as a commercial controller, I was in charge of working with the business team to allocate the scarce resources. And because we know that telecoms is a bit volatile and dynamic, because technology keeps changing, so it's either you innovate and or die. So I had the responsibility of supporting the business teams to ensure that they carry out the required projects, right, that will give us the maximum return. And in terms of looking at there was a metric we were looking at then, which is called the CAPEX productivity, to ensure that we are extracting the maximum value from the CAPEX investment. So we had to allocate to ensure that we're extracting the maximum value. And what I'm doing currently is to support SMEs. To help them understand innovation and how they can have cost savings that will help them to grow their businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, actually, you were all in some way or form mentioning that your role is reasonably broad and there's a breadth of issues that you work on. I was just wondering, as it relates to innovation and to being a change agent, the topic of today's discussion, what are the core skills and also sort of capabilities you would say you have to have in your field to be successful at that? I was actually wondering, for example, with Tim, you, like, in the end, you're looking at this very complex well, medical landscape that your company is operating in. Like, what does that require in terms of like insight into the medical side of things? And then also sort of what are the things that you're bringing from a finance perspective?
Yeah, I would say my learning curve is enormous at the company. It's very humbling every single day to be surrounded by brilliant scientists, but I love learning it. And so with that, trying to essentially have enough information to be dangerous, to know what are the questions that are relevant to our competitive landscape, and participating in our business discussions, not necessarily just as a finance person, but as somebody in the business. But then bringing to that, how can the role of finance help us bring in innovation and help it fund innovation? And so a lot of the good discussions I've had with our chief scientific officer is getting a good understanding from her of what's exciting and what's interesting. And I asked the question, well, how can we bring it in? What would it take? What kind of partnership do we want? And we very quickly move away from, can we afford it? Should we do it? To instead saying, how do we do it? And I think that's a place where we recognize what are the strengths that each of us bring. We respect each other's expertises in it, but how do we do it for the betterment of the company as well?
Is there sort of like, since you've been in this role, have there been sort of any significant shifts as to how the company is seeing innovation, how it's funding innovation? I know that there's, especially in your industries, that there's a lot of new forms of funding, especially sort of therapies that haven't been, or that are very new and are still in the exploratory phases. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the models that you have.
Yeah, sure. So we're in the genetic profiling space for cancer, and it's a very, very fast growing space right now. I would say there's a lot of interest in this space from diagnostic companies, from pharmaceutical companies. It's a place that is well funded in the industry right now as well. So we do see acquisitions going on fairly regularly. So competitive intelligence for us is very, very important. But we as a company have taken much more of a portfolio view, and to really say, how can we be strong in a breadth of offerings rather than a single offering? We have an FDA approved test, and so we also look at that as a way to be competitively differentiated by showing that through quality, and particularly when it comes to healthcare, that there's really a need to be bringing a high quality product to patients and to physicians as well. But we're constantly looking at where is the science going. We invest significantly in the science and medical publications, and really being at the leading edge of listening and understanding to what is out there and how can we incorporate that into our offerings so that we become more actionable, more relevant, and really trying to be at the leading edge of how we can transform cancer care. So it's a daily shift in how that's all going, and it's really exciting as well. But as I said, we're excited to be in a portfolio strategy as we look at all of this.
Thank you. Roxy, how is that for you? Like, coming back to that question on sort of skills and capabilities, like sort of how deep do you have to be inside the technological side of the business in order to be a good as CFO and sort of advancing innovation and change within the company? Do you have explain a little bit how that works for you?
I think it's a very critical capability that CFOs today need to have, is to almost like we should always be able to understand product and competitive landscape and how our product works, almost like a product manager. You be able to have the conversations and ask relevant questions, and because our job eventually is to enable decision makings. And help people to make better decisions by asking the right questions. So I found, influencing skills are really important, but you can't influence unless you know what to ask and how to have conversations and to, connect with humans across, all levels and all functions in the company. And talking about decision making, I also think it's also very important skill to be able to technically, today the cloud operations and how data is becoming so pervasive, deeply in the product development cycle. I think that's also a new skill that CFOs need to develop, is to understand the data science and data analytical aspect of companies outside of financial data, because data silos need to be broke down for us to actually make end-to-end decisions and enable people to be more comprehensive in that manner as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. So yeah, I don't know, Ozan, whether you would describe yourself as being as sort of deep in the business that you would say you could also be a product manager. But yeah, just given that you were talking about the different brands that you're working with, I guess that also involves a lot of detailed knowledge that you have to have about the competitive landscape. You were mentioning Amazon, of course, which is evolving fast and driving e-commerce.
I think I benefit primarily. Our CEO is actually a serial entrepreneur. Lucky enough for me. He started SparkNotes almost 20 years ago and sold it to Barnes & Noble, and then subsequently started OkCupid, for those of you that do online dating, and sold it to Match and incubated Tinder out of there. So he comes from that product mindset that I've just really absorbed over the last 4 years. But I think having worked at a company prior to this that was in the e-commerce space at Capal, which is basically open table for booking corporate events. And if any of you have ever booked a corporate event, it's painful. And so we were merchandising that on a website, has really kind of triggered my intellectual curiosity just to really understand, as Roxy alluded to, how does product and tech work? And so I think that's one of those things. And typically in a tech company, 60% of the company is product and tech, marketing, design. And so to be a very strong finance leader, you have to assimilate, empathize, and really understand their language. And so I've really done that. And I think that's the trust that you end up building, which is really, really important, especially as you start to get into these R&D projects. A few other complementary roles I've taken is sales, and I actually manage all of our existing accounts. And for me, I think the biggest thing is just I'm very intellectually curious, and I just, kind of like the 5 whys. I just want to understand how things work. But I also want to hear from our customers directly and not, through a conduit. And so having that wide skill set, I think allows, as I think Tim alluded to, just having more influence in the decision making, because there's just a lot more credibility. And so I think that multi-threaded understanding of how the internal stuff works and the external stuff works just makes you a stronger pillar as decisions are being made, so you can have a great conversation with the product leaders.
Toyin, how is that with you? So both in the current role as well as in your previous role, sort of what are the skills and the capabilities you'd say sort of you find or have found the most important in relationship to innovation and change management?
Okay, thank you for the question. So one critical skill that is required is trust, because you need to win the key stakeholders in the business to your side, because there's this general feeling that finance is a showstopper. So you need to work with the team to break this mindset that finance is not just going to say no. Because most of the business or the commercial team, they come with you defensive already, that after all, you are going to say no. So you need to engage them more. Your communication has to be empathic, so that you put yourself in their position. You need to listen to them, look at things from their own perspective, and try to explain to them, right? Because when you do this, you build trust with them, and they can come to you. And before going into some of the projects, they bring you in from the start. So that engagement and continuous communication is extremely important. And the CFO has the overall view of the performance of the business. So we stand a chance of influencing everybody to our side, but we just need to understand them, right? And also make them understand the implication of their actions, how it impacts on the EBITDA and the bottom line. These are very important.
Yeah, I think actually that's a very interesting point that you're raising there, which leads us naturally to my next question, which was to basically talk a little bit about the potential tension that one could see between R&D and innovation and the finance side of things. That is, of course, funds are always limited, even if you have a lot of them. And so there is, of course, always a case to be had and an argument to be had about saying, well, how much are we allocating to this? Is it really worth it? And I was wondering sort of if you can share like a few experiences that you've been having in terms of sort of navigating that potential tension within the company between innovation and finance, and finance, as you, Toyin said, sometimes being the showstopper or the no-sayer, having to be that, of course. Tim, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's so topical too, because we're in the middle of budget season. I'm guessing a few of us are these days. So it's a bit topical, but for me, I think the secret weapon in a lot of this is transparency. And I start the discussion on budgeting, really even back in June and July, and not that we need to turn the crank then, but we can at least start getting our management team oriented towards what is our financial situation, what are our drivers, what are our goals, where are the places we want to invest. And the more that becomes part of the common parlance and an understanding of how we're seeing the numbers, how they come together, where our choices are, I think it just helps a lot more as we get into some of the more challenging parts of the process where, okay, the numbers are coming together and the sales team wants one thing and the R&D team wants something else, and creating more of an environment of mutual trust and respect and understanding. And at the end of the day, that we make our choices together. I think it's important that a management team, when we're going through trade-offs, that it's not the CFOs did it, because then you live with that throughout the year that finance took away my budget, and that doesn't set anybody up for success. So I think a lot of it's about building on a lot of this, and how do you, I think as Ozan was saying too, this transparency as well, and just making that part of the culture, and then from there a good platform to talk about how do we fund as much innovation as possible.
Has that strategy always worked out, or can you also recall incidents where actually it ended as, well, you as the CFO cut the budget and therefore there was sort of some disharmony, or have you always managed to sort of find that balance?
I think it's important for the CFO to have an opinion and have a recommendation. Mm-hmm. That's the place where I found that if you rely on putting it out in the table and the team to fix it, you're actually not helping anybody, and we're really not living up to what the role needs to be for the company. So it's important to be transparent about the situation, but I think also to say, in our roles, here's 3 options, and we can decide how painful we want to do it. Here's the pros and cons. How do we as a management team get to an opinion? But I think it's important for the CFO to have a recommendation out of that, at least to state an opinion, and at least for the CEO as well, who's also trying to manage all the constituents. How do you get to a place that you can optimize your outcome given the various constraints that we have? And you're right, that doesn't mean it's pleasant in the meeting, a couple hours afterwards. It doesn't mean people want to go for a beer with you, but they probably do a week later. And I think people feel like we got through a process. If it's a bit mutually painful versus just painful on one team, that's also not good. I think a whole management team going through it together and feeling like we solved a tough problem can be a good bonding thing to do as well. Not that you look for it to be painful, but recognizing that it is part of what our roles are for a company.
Roxy, how are you managing that at Mozilla?
Yeah, I think, resources are always constrained. I always share with people, my role, the hardest thing to do is not to say no. It's easier to say no than to say yes. So we want to get to yes, right? But how do we get there? Is art, it's trust in this relationship, it's alignment on ambitions. What do we want to accomplish as a company together and with limited resource? I think that upfront investment on alignment, building that alignment on ambitions, and therefore our goals and objectives for the next year and years to come, especially when innovation is a journey. It's not just the next 6 months and 12 months a budget, it's a journey. We got to be consistent with that, with our mission and our ambition. So that's really important. I think building that alignment, building that relationship and trust. When you have to say no, it's well understood. It's our job. But I think it's also incredibly motivating for teams when CFOs are pushing them to make more investment, to take more risk, and to be more courageous and spend a little bit more money, because look at this, right? It's a clear ROI. I think that's also an important thing for us to seek those opportunities to build credibility as well.
Ozan, do you want to add anything? I think we heard some from you on this, but.
Yeah, let me just give one example. I think one of the things that we practice from the top is we want to empower all of our 225 employees to come up with great ideas. And so ironically, one of our sales team members who has a blip of innovation, I don't know if it was organic, innate, or acquired over time, but really thought we could given the data set that we have 3 million members, active members that get our 2-day free shipping benefit. We're not quite at Amazon level yet. That go across 100 brands to actually get their 2-day free shipping benefit. But we get tons of data from all the different traffic on our retailers' websites. And he had the foresight to say, hey, Stitch Fix, for those of you that don't know, Stitch Fix effectively is a subscription box that through data science and offline services has millions of customers that get boxes every month. And the idea was that since we had so much data and such strong relationship with retail partners, we could actually push subscription boxes since we knew our customers and members so well. And so great idea, obviously a great big total addressable market to go after. Stitch Fix is public, $3 billion company. We have more insights. And so we gave them a budget. We wanted to focus our team that's already building our other core products. So we bucketed this outside of our actually core, gave them $500,000 with resources and allowed them to speak to our member base. And so we did 2 boxes, and we found that, through surveys, otherwise we weren't getting the return rates were really significantly high. And so there was a situation of friction where you can imagine someone that's so excited to do a subscription box, doesn't want to give up, obviously doesn't want to use his own capital, but thinks the opportunity is so big, and we would have monthly presentations. And I think the key as the finance leader to have that trust and respect was immersing yourself in the data, also providing feedback that's not just no. And so I think by the time that 3rd box went out and we ended up with a lot of product that got returned, that we had to write off or give to the employee base, that it was well known that it was the right time to stop. We had invested enough. It was a big opportunity. The whole 225 employee team member base was like, wow, that's really inspiring that we can actually think and be creative. We obviously don't say yes to every opportunity, but I think those type of situations where we allowed someone to do it, it was boxed in risk, and we had defined outcomes, but I was immersed the whole way, which I think, when the ultimate no came out, it was a collective no. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting example. I was about to ask you all sort of what the development horizons for your companies are. Roxy, you said, of course, innovation is not a 6 months or 12 months project, so it's something that has to feed through the company. But sort of maybe explain a little bit sort of the risk appetite of your companies, and also when is then the time to pull the plug. Ozan, you were saying it was the right time to stop. So we also had a question, similar question on this from Kristen Todd from the audience. So yeah, I wanted to weave that in. Soyin, do you want to start?
Okay, so the way it works, based on my past experience, is that at the beginning of the year, there's a framework that is set in terms of what are the, how much is going to be allocated for the revenue generating projects, how much is going to be allocated to some network servicing, optimization, then how much is going to be allocated to handle innovation. So what we've done in the past is to allocate about 70% to revenue generating projects, right? Then about 30% to optimization or maintenance, and the remaining 10% is allocated to innovation. And there's a pool that is funded through cost-saving initiatives that we can pull out from that to support the innovation. But from the beginning of the year, there's like a framework that is set so that we are all aligned on what we want to achieve in that particular year, so that it doesn't create some kind of conflict or tension, especially in the business unit. And the other thing we've done is instead of going all out, when people come up with ideas, instead of going all out to implement it, we usually have something we call like a challenger base. So we do a pilot on, let's say, about 10% of the customer base to evaluate the impact. Then we can now extend that initiative to the entire base. And by so doing, we can minimize the impact, because innovation in itself, you can't really ascertain what the outcome may be. It could be positive or negative. So we try to minimize the risk, to manage it by allocating the budget at the beginning of the year. So that's the way we've managed the budget allocation while I was in Airtel. Thank you.
Roxy or Tim or anyone? Any further thoughts?
Yeah, I may have, our company probably has the longest product development cycle out of everybody. It tends to be about 2 to 4 years. And I would say, overall, that's a good thing because we're a medical related product. And so what goes into that is a combination of identifying new science and new ways to identify science that can help inform cancer care, but then also how do we do it through a regulatory process in the way that we can scale it once we get approval. And so when we look at our portfolio, there's a sense of duration in that portfolio about when are things going to launch, when are we going to have uptake of products, so that you can continue to fund the ongoing portfolio, but then also looking at ways of how can we launch faster and how do we maximize the profile of our products to ensure that they'll be competitively differentiated. And what we find going through it too, and I think like any portfolio that can have a sense of duration, is sometimes things that went in a couple of years ago, the underlying facts had changed, maybe through competitive entry or the time to develop took longer, or the scientific thesis behind it may have collapsed. And so those are the things where we do make the tough choice to say, do we want to keep plugging into it? Is there something there, or is it a dry well? And we just need to call it off so that we can put money into projects that are incrementally more valuable. So it's really that sense of how are we looking at the more dynamic sense of value in our portfolio and recognizing that things that looked great a year or 2 or 3 years ago may not compete with the newest things that we're looking to invest in. But also recognizing we do have this longer portfolio, so we need to be sure things are coming out of the portfolio as well to drive the growth of the business. But Roxy, I'll turn it over to you to hear also about it, Mozilla.
So we're 100% software today, and our our core business which is the Firefox browser, has the longest release cycle. It's about 6 months, the longest. Sometimes it takes less than that. And then we have the adjacent product portfolio. Those are product already have some level of a certain certainty on product market fit and have early revenue already. It's about growth. It's about how do you get to the new features development and things like that. So those release cycles are in the 2 to 3 months, right? You want to make sure it keeps getting feedback. And then on the very, very far end of the innovation, we have Horizon, we have investment in a number of very, very far end transformational innovation ideas and product or technology ideas. Those you can think about having, between making the first investment to something will come out and be a viable business. You're probably looking at a 7-year cycle to become a new business, but the development cycle is very fast because you want to ensure you have a very high kill rate for that. So the best ideas will survive and best ideas will compete and come out. So for us, it's really that portfolio management of the capital allocation to make sure we establish the right metrics and that establish the right feedback loops for us to make decisions fast.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. We actually got a question from the audience, which is somewhat related to what we were just talking about, this recognition that, of course, sometimes within companies, there's this acknowledgement that there's a need to pivot and to shift the whole organization, not just a project, but the whole focus of the organization. Can you talk a little bit about if you've come across those situations in your careers, and also sort of how you then navigated that challenge? And I know, of course, that there's a lot of companies in these current times where the coronavirus pandemic is challenging business models that are realizing, well, what we did before is currently not working, and we're not sure whether it's going to work again. So just wondering what your thoughts on this are. Ozan, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So one of the ideas that we had as a business, this is more from a product perspective, is that given we have all these brands, we offer 2-day free shipping, we have all these members, where now the members actually get the experience if you actually go to katespade.com or brooksbrothers.com or saks.com, wherever your preference is to spend your money, is that we could actually take all that inventory and put it onto our own app. And as you know, the sexy thing these days is having Amazon.com use the app, use the Target app. in bringing all that product to one distribution channel, which would be our own app. And so we had 40 resources actually working on that. And I think as we came into even pre-COVID, as we evolved and learned how difficult B2C as a business is, it's really, really hard to get people to come to your website. It's really, really cool because it's good to talk about and show people at dinner, but to actually get people to get to your website cost efficiently from a cost of acquisition and lifetime value perspective, it's much easier to talk about and much harder to execute. And so what we did learn in the process, and we pivoted, it was difficult because the team was very excited. We'd hired a lot of iOS app developers. They came on this mission of really, really, getting tens of millions of people to use this one destination app called District, which we've now kind of put on ice for now. But what evolved out of that is an acquisition that we made of a company out of New York called Spring, who had a large product catalog, and they were doing the same thing and was having the same economic challenges of getting their cost of acquisition was just way higher than they were generating revenue, people going to their website and buying. But we actually figured out, as the marketplace volume is increasing, as shown on Amazon, where it's over 50% of their volume, there was other channels that these brands could get to, whether it was Instagram, Facebook, Target, eBay. If you're a brand, you can't just get everyone to go to your website. And especially now with COVID, going to stores is challenging as well. So what are the different channels that you're going to be distributing your catalog to sell your products? And so the pivot there was we actually had a catalog we were going to surface on our app. And we just decided we're going to take that catalog and distribute it to all these channels that have tons of customers already. As you know, Target has tons of distribution. There's 200 million MAU on Facebook and Instagram hourly, I'm sure. So that was a pivot that we had to do more from a B2C lens to a B2B lens. But had we not built the infrastructure and the technology and the awareness of the market opportunity, we would not have been able to move as quickly. And so that's a very successful product for us that we've launched, and we have 30 brands live on Instagram. So it's very, very exciting.
Anyone else? Any other takers? I have many more questions actually from the audience. It seems that the audience is now woken up to posing us questions. That's great. But I don't know, Tim, Roxy, Toyin, do you want to add anything to that?
Okay,
Oh, go ahead, Toyin.
Okay, so one thing that has been impacted, if I look at the context in Nigeria, so many companies have slowed down in terms of their long-term investment because of COVID. And let me give an example. At some point, like Airtel was planning to have the home broadband, to have connections, physical connection to each of the homes. But when COVID happened, that plan had to be stopped because of the social distancing and the fact that so many people are now connecting through their mobile. So at that point in time, that investment will not yield the required returns. So a number of organizations, and apart from telecoms as well, they are slowing down. And another area that has been impacted is with respect to commercial real estate, right? Because most people are working from home now. So there's a shift from commercial real estate to private real estate, because most people are working from home. So a number of the buildings that were constructed for commercial purposes are now being converted. So most of them had to pivot to ensure that they meet the immediate need. So those are some of the ways that industries have been impacted in Nigeria because of COVID.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly, the things that we're seeing is a shift. And one of the horrible downsides, I think, of COVID is patients aren't going to the doctor's office to get care. And particularly in cancer, that can lead to unfortunate outcomes if a patient doesn't get something identified or treated sooner. And so one of the pivots we're seeing is now more of a use of mobile phlebotomy, where a nurse can go to a patient's home and draw blood. And that's one of our offerings, is to run a cancer test based on blood rather than relying on them going into the office to get a tissue sample. And so this is a place too where we're looking to try to continue access for patients that does not slow down their cancer care at all.
During COVID, I think, because our business is very much in the search industry, and people start, especially at the beginning of COVID, people spend most of their time in front of the computer searching for news as opposed to buying things. And there's a huge amount of challenge for search industry to, rely on people who, actually do commercial activities. So it was important for us to ensure our funding and for product development and future innovation activities not being pulled away by this gravity well of our large search business. So we actually made a very, very large adjustment, and that's pretty public in the middle of the summer, to ensure that the company is set up for to weather the storm of this revenue impact, short term, hopefully revenue impact, but also structurally enable us to have the capacity to continue invest for innovation, long run innovation activities.
I'm aware that we're somewhat not out of time yet. We still have 10 minutes, but we had a few more questions from the audience that I at least briefly wanted to touch upon. We had one question which relates to some of what Toyin just said a minute ago with regards to return on investment and sort of yield, whether a project yields the results that were expected. Could you explain a little bit, maybe each of you or just a few, sort of what metrics you're looking at when you're looking at whether an investment is potentially going to pay off for the company or not, and what are the things that you're looking at to assess that?
Yeah, we look at a lot of, sure, I'll jump in with it. We definitely, we'll look at the traditional finance metrics, and to the extent we can, things like, revenue expectations and NPV. A lot of it also comes down to competitive differentiation. For us, it's also ability to actually realize the new innovation. So this, what we call in the industry, probability of technical success. So is it something we can actually do? And so it's really, while the numbers may be an input to the discussion, it really sets the starting point for a broader discussion with our portfolio committee about what are the things we want to invest in. And we can refer to those justifications down the road once we've gotten an approval or launched a product. But generally, things have moved on so much from what we initially thought, because it is a fairly dynamic space. We need to have a good belief that it was worth the funds at the time, and then maximize the value of the asset once it comes out of our pipeline.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the other projects that we're working on is same-day delivery exchange. And so, as you can imagine, each individual brand that has stores across the US or one distribution center, whenever you order something online, can't compete against Amazon and get packages to you within an hour of clicking checkout. And so what we're doing is we're actually building a platform that connects all the last mile delivery companies, and there's 800 of them. You've probably heard of Uber, Postmates, DoorDash, all the VC-backed ones that have coverage across the US. And so one of those things is it's a timing situation that we talked about earlier. And 5 years ago, same day was not really a thing. And now it's just the expectation, even if it's obviously for commoditized goods, but if you're buying that American Eagle sweater, do you need it today or not? But if ultimately everything you're buying is same day, you become habitualized to just expect that. And so as it relates to kind of ROI, we're making incremental investments to prove out points. Can we do multiple cities with a retailer and have multiple couriers? Like that's good enough. Because I think, once you get 2 couriers, you can do 100. Like those incremental additions don't provide as much value as like the smaller things. And so we really focus on what are the things we need to do to just prove the outcomes that will happen at scale later on anyway, without having to invest all that capital up front. So we're much more focused on those small things. And obviously we want to get signals from the market. Do consumers want it? Will they pay for it? You can do that with surveys and stuff on the front end, talking to your customers and members. But there are certain situations where, the market may not be ready, and timing, as in a lot of products, is everything. So there's WebEx was a thing 15 years ago that not everyone was using, right? And so obviously Zoom is prevalent today. So timing is definitely the most important component, and we're hopefully at the forefront of that, with the tailwind of Amazon.
Okay, so in terms of looking at the ROI, I will highlight that there are 3 areas. Is it going to increase your revenue? So what metrics will increase the revenue? Is it going to reduce the cost? Because there are some initiatives that are meant to reduce the cost. Is it going to improve the experience of the customers, right? So we need to look at it from both qualitative and quantitative, and that has to be agreed with the key stakeholders so that expectations are aligned, right? So that you track whether you are increasing the revenue, or there's going to be cost reduction, or there's going to be improvement in the experience of the customers. So once all those are agreed, then the metrics to measure can be determined and you can start tracking.
I'm aware that we only have 5 minutes left, but there's two things I wanted to ask you about. One thing to do with innovation, of course, has to do with culture and having an innovative culture. What's your role as CFOs in this? And also then second one, if you're looking at your finance departments, of course, there's also lots of ways to innovate that. For me, I'm frequently writing about things like automation and software robots that do things for people so that they don't have to do a lot of manual data entry anymore. Just curious to hear what your thoughts are on those 2 points, just maybe briefly so that we can all have a final say before we need to log off here. Roxy, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I think, CFOs, you actually need to take the role as the innovation champion and be the role model for that. At Mozilla, we have a very, very complex, as an example, business applications landscape because of the SaaS, proliferation of SaaS applications, and people have, the decision-making of software has been really gone down to the business team, and people can spend a little bit of a monthly of their budget to install a tool. And then over time, that has becoming a landscape. It's a little bit unmanageable. So we actually took on that challenge to started a whole enterprise level architecture, data architecture redesign, and really waive the master data management and reference data, definition effort to make it, data break down all the data silos we have because of all those tools we have, and also build a workflow engine such that the workflows, there's a platform for the business team to automate their workflows through that engine. And it's a very easy interface for people to learn and grasp. So connect data with workflow, with the transactions, and then also on the back end, our Google Cloud platform be able to enable analytics as well. So as a company, we're on the path to have end-to-end data visibility for decision making. So I think that can be a example for us to in the finance area to actually innovate for the company to enable innovation, enable decision making. I think being an example is also a really interesting aspect of our role as well.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other takers for that one?
I would say on the culture piece, I think one of the big opportunities of the CFO in being a champion for innovation is people don't always expect it. As Toyin said, they expect us to be a showstopper. And so when the CFO is challenging people for what else can we do and let's do it differently, I think there's a real opportunity. One, it's a lot more fun, but I think secondly, it can really shift the tone of the organization and get people behind it as well. I think the part in terms of our team and some of the things we've done to adapt as well, we went through a process last year of reducing our close from 10 days to 3 days. And it took us about 6 months to do it. It wasn't easy, but we learned a lot going through it. And now the team has almost a week and a half more time every month to really do a lot of other things. And so it's the kind of thing where innovation just isn't on the science side of the business, it's throughout the entire company. And I think we can be evangelists for that as well in our roles.
I think the only other thing I would add is in our finance meetings weekly, I actually provide context to kind of how the business is going. And I think it's very typical in finance, especially in the accounting side, to be very siloed into the blocking and tackling. And I've just, in my last 2 organizations, I've just been it's been happy just to see people receive that information, because typically they're not used to understanding, like, why do we make a decision? Why do we cut the subscription box? Why do we decide to switch from our B2C app to a B2B? And no one really spends that time. And typically they're not intellectually curious to find that out. And so I've found that once you communicate that proactively the questions start flowing in because they're actually curious. They're just afraid to ask questions they don't know the answers to. And so I think creating that environment I've not seen as typical, but I've found has been very, very empowering, and especially is allowing the finance team to develop relationships with product, tech, marketing, ones that, you know, in some situations 2 years into their role don't even know the names of. So I think that breaking down those barriers really increases that trust and, you know, capabilities, and it allows them to become more strategic, not just yourself.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're out of time. I don't know, Toyin, if you have like a 30-second statement, but there's
okay, so what I'll just say is that as finance, we need to keep engaging. We need to keep engaging and building that culture of trust. And we can have our team members assigned to the different business units, right, to work hand in hand with them and to show them some of these things, because we shouldn't assume that they know. So it is our responsibility to open their eyes to see the overview of the implications of their actions. So we keep engaging and engaging and we keep engaging. That is extremely important. The more we engage, the better the relationship will be. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a nice way of sending us off here. We are unfortunately out of time, even though we, I guess, all still have many more questions to ask. Thanks to my panel for taking the time to talk to us today. It was an interesting session and I very much enjoyed talking to you. This masterclass session is closing soon, as you know. So we'll, once this is finished, if you want to attend future following sessions, you can navigate back to the agenda page within the event platform that you joined to take part in this, to join the next session, which begins at 4 p.m. Lessons from the sports world, how America's most competitive industry is facing its greatest challenge, which, yeah, also sounds like an interesting one to join. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon again.